Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please be ready in front of your screen, and we would like to thank you for joining us today. We will begin the webinar in 5 minutes.
The Malaysian English Language Teaching Association, or MELTA as it is commonly known, is Malaysia's oldest national English language teaching association. Founded in 1958, the association has grown significantly over the years. Despite its evolution from the Selangor English Language Teaching Association, as it was first known, the aspirations of the association remain anchored to what is spelled out in our Constitution. We are an association of English language teachers dedicated to advancing English language education. Towards this end, MELTA works with partners in Malaysia as well as overseas. To date, MELTA has formal partnerships with English language teaching associations in Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Thailand, Mongolia, Indonesia, India, Brunei, Hong Kong, Bangladesh, and Taiwan. These partnerships allow MELTA to engage in continuous dialogue with other English language teaching associations, and in doing so, create opportunities for the professional development of our members on a global scale. Within Malaysia, MELTA is committed to reaching as many English teachers as possible. Towards this goal, we are represented by MELTA chapters made up of dedicated teams of English language practitioners. As a national association, the association activities are managed by several bureaus, namely bureaus for training, research and development, publications, special projects, journals, special interest groups, chapters, and technologies. The association is only as strong as its members, so we look forward to your support. Join us and let's work towards our shared vision of advancing English language education.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining the first MELTA Penang chapter webinar, Make Thinking Visible, Practical Thinking Tools for the ESL Classroom. I'm Associate Professor Dr. Mabunyi, and I will be your moderator today. On behalf of the committee, I would like to express our gratitude to Dr. Joanna Joseph Jayaraj, who is our speaker today. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that at this time, all participants are in a listen mode only. After the end of the sharing session, the participants will have 15 minutes to engage in the Q&A session, 10 minutes to answer a short survey, and 3 minutes to fill up the attendance and webinar feedback form to receive your e-certificates. If you have any questions for the presenter, kindly post them in the chat box. Let me introduce our speaker today. Dr. Joanna Joseph Jayaraj obtained her Doctor of Philosophy from the Higher Education Development Center at the University of Otago. Her doctoral thesis focuses on how English language higher education teachers from various countries engage with critical pedagogy in teaching and learning. After completing her PhD study, she joined the Swinburne University of Technology, Sarawak, as a lecturer, and Tunku Abdul Rahman University College as a senior lecturer. Dr. Joanna is currently a senior lecturer in the Department of Language and Humanities Education at the Faculty of Educational Studies, University Putra, Malaysia. Her research interests include critical pedagogy, servant teaching, postgraduate education, and academic staff research engagement. Without further ado, I would like to welcome our esteemed speaker, Dr. Joanna Joseph Jayaraj, to present her sharing session entitled Make Thinking Visible, Practical Thinking Tools for the ESL Classroom. Let us welcome.
Very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session. Thank you, Dr. Ma, for the kind words of introduction. Before I begin, I'd like to say thank you to MELTA and the MELTA Penang chapter for having me here today. I'm very excited to be here to share with you a little bit about how we can make thinking a little bit more visible in the class in our ESL classrooms. But at the same time, I'm a bit nervous because I can't really see who's out there. But nevertheless, I'm very happy to be here, and I hope that this would be a useful session for all of us. I thought as a starting point, I would share with you a little bit about my interest in thinking and visible thinking routines. So, well, I guess the first reason is because, I developed an interest in thinking because of the prominence of thinking skills in the work that I do. There are a lot of examples of thinking that I can see just in my immediate work environment. For instance, if I look through course documents, there is a focus on thinking, on critical thinking, on problem solving. at program level as well, we see that. Even at university level, a lot of institutions have graduate attributes. And if you look at the sorts of graduates that universities want to produce, they would be ones that have intellectual curiosity, critical thinking, problem solving, logical and independent thought. Even at a more macro level, if we look at the Malaysian education blueprint, there is a focus on thinking as well. So, because it's so much part of the work that I do, that is one reason why I am interested in thinking. Even though there seems to be a lot of focus on thinking, there still are some assertions that there is a lack of thinking skills. Both at higher education level and also at secondary level. So if you read the newspapers, if you're on social media, you would see that there are claims that, students may not have the adequate thinking skills that is required for a certain level. So there seems to be a deficit narrative when it comes to thinking. So that's another reason why I am also interested in thinking. The next reason, I think, is a more personal reason, because of my own research interest in critical pedagogy. So we're not going to talk about critical pedagogy today, but just very generally, critical pedagogy is linking education to social change and social transformation. However, before social change and social transformation happens, students need to engage in some form of criticality first. So again, there is that importance placed on thinking and engaging in critical inquiry. But one of the criticisms of critical pedagogy is that it's very theoretical in nature, and there's not much known on the practical implementations of it. So there's not much known on the how to do critical pedagogy. And in the Southeast Asian region and in Malaysia as well, critical pedagogy is a little bit underdeveloped. So when I came across visible thinking some years ago, I thought that it very suitably answered the how-to of critical pedagogy, because it provided a very structured and organized way of developing thinking and developing criticality. It is not, there are many ways in which you can address the aims of critical pedagogy. So I thought that this was one of the many aims one of the many ways in which the aims of critical pedagogy could be addressed. So that's just a little bit about my interest in thinking and in visible thinking routines, and in particular. So you're probably wondering, what am I going on about in terms of visible thinking routines? So that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. But first, let me present an overview of today's session. I will first provide a brief introduction on what visible thinking routines are and why is it important to make thinking visible. We'd look at the place of thinking skills in the Malaysian education system, and then we'd look at how we can use visible thinking routines. I'll just give you a few examples, and we'll look at what others are saying about it. And finally, to end, we would I hope that we could have a short time where I demonstrate to you how a visible thinking routine can be used. So to start off, what is visible thinking? What visible thinking does is it makes thinking, which is an invisible process, a little bit more visible. All right, as you all know, thinking is invisible. I cannot see what's going on in your mind. I cannot see what you're thinking about. But through these thinking routines, we can make the thinking of our students, a little bit more visible. So it's a systematic research-based conceptual framework that was developed by Project Zero, and they're a research group at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Through visible thinking routines that we get to integrate the development of students' thinking along with content learning. So it can be used to teach all sorts of subjects, not just English, but it's been used in mathematics, it's been used in science, it's been used in the arts. So it's linking thinking to whatever content that you may be teaching. So it is aimed to make thinking visible, as I said, through what is termed as thinking routines. And I'll show you in a while some examples of these thinking routines that have been organized into the thinking routine toolbox. So there's a toolbox, and there are all sorts of routines that have been organized in this thinking routine toolbox. Right. So these thinking tools in this toolbox have been designed with a set of questions and brief sequences of steps to support students' thinking. So that's why, as I mentioned earlier on, I found that these thinking routines were a very structured way of that we can use to develop and to address thinking in our classrooms. So you can think about visible thinking routines as mini strategies, little strategies that you can use repeatedly in your classroom, with each routine targeting a different type of thinking. So perhaps you want to focus on getting students to explore multiple perspectives. So there's a special routine for that. Or perhaps you want to get students to think a little bit more like global thinkers. So there are routines for that as well. Or perhaps you want them to explore ideas a little bit more deeply. So there are a set of routines for that. So these, they're referred to as routines because they represent a sequence of actions which are aimed at efficiently achieving a specific outcome. As I said, all the routines, there is a specific outcome that is intended. There's a specific type of thinking that is aimed for. So through these thinking routines, students are given the opportunity to mentally engage with content by offering their ideas, their explanations, justifications, interpretations, reasons, evidence, perspective, alternatives, and questions. So all these things require thinking, and it enables students to be engaged in such a process. And when students do this, they get to find a little bit more meaning in the subject of study, because more meaningful connections are made between what they're learning in school, the content that they are dealing with in school, with everyday life as well. When we ask them to provide justifications, interpretations, reasons, and evidence, so on and so forth. So what has been said about visible thinking routines is that it moves students from a place of interest, and then it brings them to a place of deep engagement, and then moves them forward to have the desire to take action and to make a difference in some way. So if you're wondering, how do we make the invisible visible? How do we make what students are thinking about a little bit more visible? And and we do this in our classrooms as teachers. Some ways in which we do this is through questioning. The sorts of questions that we ask them, we'd be able to know what they're thinking about. By listening to their views, by listening to their perspectives, to their opinions, by getting students to clarify their ideas, asking them for explanations on something after we've presented questions to them, and also by documenting. And this is another important element of visible thinking, because there is a focus on seeking to get students to document their ideas, all right, to put it down in writing, either put it on paper or to make it visible in that way. So these are some ways in which, and I'm sure we all do this in the classroom, we make the invisible a little bit more visible. So before I actually go through selected visible thinking routines, these are just some examples, and you may have heard of some of these names: See, Think, Wonder, Step Inside, 3 Whys, Circle of Viewpoint. So these are just a few of the many examples of visible thinking routines. And now I'd be interested to hear a little bit from you on whether you have ever used such routines. It may not be these, what we call visible thinking routines from this toolbox, but have you used any routines or any strategies to make your students' thinking a little bit more visible in your teaching? So if you say yes, can you type Y in the chat box? And if you have not, then you can type N for no. So I'd love to hear some of your, I'd like to just get a sense of the audience. And so I see a Y there. Thank you for your responses. Not yet. First time hearing about visible thinking. Okay, great. I see some responses. Okay. So someone like See, Think, Wonder. I briefly saw that. Great. Okay. Thank you. Please keep your answers coming. It's nice to see you respond. Okay, so let me just share with you some insights from teachers, right? I have 2 examples. So these are some teachers who have who, after hearing about visible thinking routines, this is what they said. So this is Shirley. She's a teacher in Perak, and she has 12 years of experience, and this is what she has to say. I should say I have tried using it with my students, but not the complete steps of the routines. For example, See, Think, Wonder. So probably we just use See and Think, as we didn't know the different visible thinking routines and the terms. What I mean here is that we probably do it without realizing it is part of visible thinking routines. So this is what Shirley, a teacher from, it's a pseudonym, she's a teacher from Perak, she has to say. So she's used it, but she didn't actually know the actual name of it yet. This is another teacher from Terengganu, and she has 11 years of teaching experience. And after she came to know about visible thinking routines, and when I asked her if she'd ever used something similar before, she said, when I first learned the routines, they were very similar to what I had been doing with my students. I just didn't utilize words like see, think, and wonder. in my pre-lessons, I have shown students graphics or videos and used the term think. So here, another teacher who has drawn on some of the ways of doing See, Think, Wonder, but didn't actually have a name for it. So based on these two teachers' experiences, I think what I got from it is that sometimes we may do certain things, but we may not yet have a name for our practice and what we do. And then when we come across different ways of doing things, we think, oh, hey, yeah, I do that as well. So when we have a name for our practice, then we'd be able to see the sorts of philosophies that we draw upon and the sorts of theories that inform our work. All right, so moving on, a little bit about why it's important to make thinking visible. Now, what happens when we make thinking visible? What power does it have? Firstly, when we make thinking visible, it provides students with deep learning opportunities. All right. Now, through visible thinking, to understanding and thinking happen. All right. And these are the core of what needs to happen in order to have deep learning experiences. So visible thinking routines have been designed in such a way that they help students develop understanding and enable them to engage in thinking. The second power of visible thinking is that it cultivates engaged students. So students do not just engage intellectually, but they also engage emotionally. And later I will show you some examples of how visible thinking routines also engage with the emotional side of things. All right. And teachers who have drawn upon visible thinking have observed that there are three levels of engagement when visible thinking routines are brought into the classroom. So there's engagement with others, other students in the classroom, other peers, engagement with ideas, so intellectual engagement, and also engagement in action, which is kind of the outcome of learning. Thirdly, another power that visible thinking has is that it changes the role of teachers and students. Through these thinking routines, they challenge the very traditional transmission model of education, where teachers are regarded as providers of knowledge and students the recipients of knowledge. All right. So through visible thinking, teachers who have used this, they see themselves as orchestrators who establish a culture of inquiry for meaningful exploration. And when teachers do this, they get to know their students in different ways. So they don't just get to know their students in terms of their academic performance, but because of the ways in which some of the routines have been designed, teachers get to know a little bit more about what is important to their students, what do their students care about, what motivates their students, and what sorts of challenges they might face. All right, so it changes the traditional model of education, transmission model of education, to one that is more to one where students also have power in co-creating knowledge with the teacher. And one teacher who engaged in visible thinking routines, she describes it as she had, through these routines, it enabled her to provide a voice for students thinking. All right, and I really like that. When I read, there was this book that I was reading, and that teacher said it helped her to provide a voice for her students thinking through these routines. Fourthly, visible thinking has also been seen to improve learning. and when it's measured through, even when it's measured through standardized tests. So now, it's been around for more than 10 years or so. There is evidence to show that when students engage with visible thinking, there is effective learning that happens. There are learning gains. This has been seen by schools who have adopted and who have strived to make thinking a little bit more visible in teaching and learning. For instance, schools in the US, in Australia, in Singapore as well. So, through students' test scores, through reports from teachers, from parents, it is seen that visible thinking routines can improve learning. And another power of visible thinking, about making thinking visible, is that it helps to develop thinking dispositions. And having a disposition towards thinking goes beyond just having a skill or an ability. The student may be able to think critically, but they might not have the disposition to do so. They might not have the inclination to do so. So through visible thinking routines, and when we strive to make thinking a little bit more visible in our classroom, it encourages students to develop an inclination, an attitude towards and dispositions towards wanting to think in a certain way. And when teachers use visible thinking routines through questioning, documenting, listening to students, they send out a message to students that these sorts of thinking are valued in the classroom. And this could, show students that this is truly valued and this truly matters, and this can encourage students to think in such a way. So that's kind of like at a broader level. So looking specifically now at the routines, why these routines? And this is according to Salmon, 2008. Visible thinking routines are very goal-oriented, okay? What that means is there are certain routines that are specific for perspective taking, that enable students to engage in a process where they look at things from the perspective of others. There are certain routines which are meant to develop global thinking. There are certain routines that are meant to enable deeper exploration of ideas. So it's very goal-oriented. And as the name suggests, visible thinking routine, because it's a routine, the aim is not just to use it one-off in your classroom, but to use it over and over again until it becomes a routine, a habit, and students know how to think in such a way. These routines also only consist of a few steps, all right? Very few steps, perhaps 3 questions, 4 questions. It is very easy to learn and easy to teach as well. It is easy to support when students are engaged in this routine. You do not require any fancy technology, or you don't need any special device to use these routines. You can use it in a classroom just using, I don't know, mahjong paper or sticky notes. So it's very easy to do. You can also use it across a variety of contexts. So not just in an English language classroom, but as I mentioned earlier, you can use it in other disciplines as well. It's been used in early childhood education, in primary school, secondary school, and even at higher education level. So it's very flexible. And you can get students to engage in these routines either in groups or even individually. So these are some reasons that make visible thinking routines quite easy and accessible for teachers. So all this may sound great. Yeah, visible thinking sounds great, great idea. But do they have a place in the Malaysian English language classroom? So to answer this question, perhaps we can look at the Malaysian education blueprint. Okay, And this is what this is an extract. So every child will learn. So one of the 6 aspirations for Malaysian students is that every child will learn how to continue acquiring knowledge throughout their lives, all right, to be able to connect different pieces of knowledge and create new knowledge. Every child will master a range of important cognitive skills, including critical thinking, reasoning, creative thinking, and innovation. And in the blueprint, it goes on to say that this is an area where the system has historically fallen short. Our education system has historically fallen short, with students being less able than they should be in applying knowledge and thinking critically. All right. So here we see that there is importance placed on it. This is one of the aspirations of our education system, and I think it aligns very suitably with the aims of visible thinking as well. Now, looking at the English language curriculum, if you look at the standards-based English language curriculum, there's an explicit focus on higher order thinking skills, the ability to apply knowledge, skills, values in reasoning, reflective problem solving, decision making. So even in the English language curriculum, there is great importance placed on this. So I think there is indeed a place for visible thinking, and teachers can find ways in which that they can draw upon it to achieve these goals and aspirations that we see in the blueprint as along with our curriculum. So I've talked for a little bit. Perhaps now I can hear a little bit more from you. What are some challenges that you might face when striving to develop thinking skills in your classrooms? Maybe you can think about this for a bit, and you can type your answers in the. You can click on the link that has been posted, and you can post your answers there. So I'm going to open that page now. I think you should be able to see this screen. I hope you can see my Mentimeter screen. So if you could just share, think about how the sorts of challenges that you might face when you strive to develop thinking skills in your respective context, in your classroom environment. Okay, I see I see some responses here. Conscious of not making students to guess the answer, right? A demotivated class. Okay, yes, sometimes we are faced with reluctant learners, and that can be quite and they're demotivated. Wait time, all right, passive students, time limitation and patience in waiting to get responses from learners. Yep. And I don't know if you would have experienced this. I think during online teaching, the wait time is a little bit longer compared to when you're in a face-to-face classroom. So do keep your answers coming, right? Think about what challenges you might face when you want to engage in, deep thinking in your classroom. And maybe we can have a look later at this slide again. And thank you for responding. Okay, yeah, I saw another answer. The students' tendency to wait for the teacher's answer. So again, here, students looking at the teacher as the knowledge provider, and they are waiting for the teacher to provide all the answers to the questions. Okay, so let's move on to my slides again. All right, so how do we develop thinking which leads to understanding? All right, so we don't want thinking in terms of just memorization, but we want thinking for understanding as well. There may be some things where students need to memorize, of course, but how do we get students to really understand and comprehend what is being taught? So these are 8 thinking moves, or it's called an understanding map by Richard and Church, 2020. So these are the different moves if you want to build understanding. All right, so they have come up with 8 different moves. So the first is observing closely. First of all, the first kind of stage is observing closely and describing what is there. So asking students, what do you see? What do you notice? And then moving on to getting students to wonder and to ask questions. So describing is not enough. You then want to lead them to ask questions and to wonder more. What's puzzling about this? And then to come to a stage where they are able to reason with evidence. What are they basing their claims on? What are they basing their justifications on? And then moving on to building explanations and building interpretations, right? And also, as they go on to build understanding, to consider different viewpoints. So to recognize that there is not only one way of looking at things, that something can be regarded in different ways. And then making connections, all right? How does what is new, their newly acquired knowledge, how are they able to make connections with what they already know? How does this fit with what you already know? And then to move on to a stage where they're able to uncover complexity and going more deeply into something, what lies beneath the surface. And finally, to capture the heart and to form conclusions, what's at the core or what's at the center. So these are different ways, these are moves in which we can build understanding among students. Okay, now, so I talked about this toolbox earlier. So these visible thinking routines have been organized in a toolbox, and I can give you the link for it later. So if you go to the website, and all this is available online, you will see that all the different thinking routines have been kind of categorized into these different themes almost. So, thinking routines relating to objects and system, thinking routines that you can use when you are looking at art or objects, when you want students to take perspectives, when you want them to synthesize and explore ideas. So the thinking routines have been organized in the toolbox according to these categories or these themes. What I'm going to do now is, so I've explained a little bit about why it's important, why these routines are important. Does it have a place in our current education system? So now let's look at the actual visible thinking routines, all right? I'm not going to show you all of them, but just a few. So the first one that I have chosen to share is a routine that's called Step Inside. So if you go to the toolbox and if you click on the link, you will come to there's a link for each routine. You will get like a PDF like this, and it will explain to you in detail how you can actually use this routine. All right, so you will see a PDF that looks something like this. Right, so the Step Inside routine is aimed at getting inside of viewpoints, and it consists of four very simple questions. The first question is, what can the person or thing perceive? The second question is, three questions. What might the person or thing know about or believe? And what might the person or thing care about? So what can the person perceive? What might that person believe? And what might that person care about? So in this way, it helps students to get inside a particular viewpoint and look at it more deep and explore it more deeply. The purpose again is to explore different perspectives and viewpoints. And when you use this routine, it gets students to imagine things, events, problems, or issues differently. All right. How do you apply it in your classroom? What you can do is you can get students to step inside the role of a character or an object. All right. So if it's a reading class, it could be a character that they're reading about, and then they imagine themselves inside that point of view. You can use this routine as an initial step for problem solving, for brainstorming, and then moving on, it opens up a topic and issue or item for more discussion. When you use this routine, it also helps to make abstract concepts a little bit more concrete and visible, and makes it come to life for students. So this is how you can apply it, and all this can be found in that PDF I told you when you click on the Visible Thinking Routine Toolbox. So here's some classroom tips. Now, if you want to use it as a warmer in your classroom before starting a class, you can get students to look at an image, all right, or a video, and get them to generate a list of perspectives or points of view that are embodied in that picture or embodied in a certain video. And then students choose a particular point of view to embody or to talk from, saying what they perceive, what they know about, and what they care about. All right, so it can just be used for a few minutes as a warmer, as an introduction in your class. If you're doing a speaking and writing task, you could ask students to improvise a brief spoken monologue or written monologue from another point of view, right? And from another point of view. If you're teaching literature in your English language curriculum, there's a component, the literature in action component. So if you're teaching literature, it can and you want to do something on character analysis, you could get students in pairs and ask them to ask each other questions, and the responses need to be the responses that character would give, the character that they read about would give. So these are some ways that you can use it in your classroom. And this routine is called Step Inside, because you are stepping inside the shoes of something else, someone else, right? And considering the viewpoints or perspectives of that person. The next thinking routine is that I thought to share is think puzzle, and explore. So this routine, it sets the stage for deeper inquiry, all right? As the name suggests, explore, so it gets deeper into an issue. And it comprises of 3 guiding questions, or 3 core questions. Again, very simple questions. What do you know about this topic? What questions or puzzles do you have? What does the topic make you want to explore? All right. Now, how, and again, you can, find the on the website, there's this whole PDF on, and it teaches you how to actually incorporate it into your class. So the purpose of Think, Puzzle, Explore is to activate prior knowledge, to generate ideas and curiosity, and it sets the stage for deeper inquiry. And how can we use it? We can use it when we want to introduce a new topic, a new concept, or a new theme that in our lessons. While we're introducing something new, it also helps students to take stock of what they already know, okay, and pushes them to identify puzzling questions or areas of interest that they want to explore further. So the third question, which is sorry, what does the topic make you want to explore? This third question is useful in helping lay the groundwork for independent inquiry. All right, what does it make you want to explore? So it's not waiting for the teacher to give you answers, or it's not waiting for someone else to give you the information, but it sets the tone that this is what the student is going to take charge of, take ownership of, and they are going to explore. So some classroom tips, as mentioned, it can be used when you want to introduce a new topic. You can use this in groups. You can use this individually as well. You can get students to keep a visible record of their ideas. So at the start of the lesson, you ask them these 3 questions and maybe ask them to write it down. They could post it on sticky notes. And then at the end of the lesson, you could revisit it again, okay, to see, how things have changed. So it helps to push students to think about things that are truly puzzling or interesting to them through this routine: think, puzzle, and explore. The last one that the third one is the 4 C's. Now this one you can use with text-based discussion, and I've used this with my students as well. There are 4 C's, 4 questions: connections, challenge, concepts, and changes. What connections do you draw between the text and your own life or your other learning? So this happens after students have read a text. What ideas, positions, or assumptions do you want to challenge or argue with? What key concepts or ideas do you think are important and worth holding on to? And what changes in attitudes, thinking, or actions are suggested by the text, either for you or for others? So the purpose is to provide learners with a structure for text-based discussion. Instead of just asking them to read a text and say, okay, students, discuss this, these 4 C's provide a structure in which students can use when they are discussing something. And it helps make connections, ask questions. They get to identify key ideas and consider its application. So it would work in a reading class. After reading a text, could be one text or could be multiple texts, then they go through the 4 C's. You can choose to just focus on 2 C's or 3 C's. You don't necessarily need to go through all the 4 C's if you want to use this routine. Some classroom tips. Now, you could begin this could begin as an individual task first. So you give students some time to read the text, to annotate or to underline parts of the text that correspond to the C's. Then they get into groups and then they can take turns. One person can share and then others may comment and add on. And then they go on until all the C's are covered. Okay, so these are just 3 visible thinking routines that I thought to share with you. But let me now show you what this might look like in an actual classroom. And these are some of examples. These are some personal examples of visible thinking routines from my own classroom. I used this routine called compass points with my students a couple of times. And compass points, like a compass, there's north, south, east, west. So E stands for excited. What excites you about this idea or proposition? W is what is worrisome. What do you find worrisome about this idea or proposition? N is what you need to know. And S is what's your stance. What is your current stance or opinion on the idea or proposition, and how might you move forward? Now, this routine helps students to flesh out an idea or proposition and eventually evaluate it. So when I used this in my class, I tweaked it a little bit. I didn't ask them to explore an idea or proposition, but instead I asked them to do the compass points task for something that I wanted them to evaluate. So let me show you. So this is a screenshot. This is a screenshot of a task that I gave my students. I was teaching them. So I teach pre-service TESOL teachers. All right, they're going to be English language teachers soon. So it was a subject on teaching novels. So I wanted them to identify one technological tool or innovation which they could incorporate into the teaching of novels. And so this is a screenshot from our learning management system. In UPM, we use Putra Blast, and Putra Blast has a wiki feature. So they get to create so it's like a Wikipedia page that they created. And I asked them to do the compass point. So they were supposed to discover a type of any technological tool or innovation and apply the compass point visible thinking routine. So this is what they did. Right, this is just a screenshot of some of the things that they taken from their work. Now, when my students did this activity, what were they actually doing? Now, through this activity, students got to work collaboratively. All right, they got to work with one another. They documented ideas through the wiki by coming up with that wiki. It made their thinking visible. They became creators of knowledge. I could have easily given a lecture and told them, these are the different types of technology or innovations that you can use. But here, they took ownership and they became the creators of knowledge. They co-constructed knowledge in an online classroom. So I did this task with them when we were doing online learning. So they weren't together in the same space. But at the same time, they got to co-construct knowledge with their peers. And they were scaffolded in the process of evaluating something. Again, you could ask your students to evaluate any innovation or digital tool, but through the compass points activity, they were scaffolded throughout this process. And what I like is finally they had to come up with a stance on what they think of that tool or what they thought of that innovation. So that's one example that I did with my students. This comes from a literature class that I taught a few weeks ago in this semester. We looked at characterization in a short story, and this is a slide from my tutorial task with them. So this routine is called feelings and options. So after reading a particular short story, students needed to do this. They needed to choose a dilemma in the short story, and then they needed to identify who are the different people involved in the dilemma and what challenge are they facing. What do you think, feel, the next part is feel, what do you think each person in the dilemma is feeling? Why might the situation be hard or challenging for them? And then they were asked to imagine options for how the situation could be handled, come up with as many ideas as possible, all right? And finally say, thinking more about the idea you choose for handling the situation. What could the people involved say? So students read different short stories, and then they applied this thinking routine for the short story that they read. And this is this is an example of so they did a presentation just shortly after I gave them these questions, and they identified, they looked at feelings, options, and what people would say. So through this activity, what did my students do? They got to engage in empathetic problem solving. All right. So it's not just solving a problem, but solving a problem, but it was driven by empathy. All right. And it helped them to develop a sensitivity towards recognizing dilemmas that they read about. It helped them to explore and care about others' perspectives and envision possible options and impacts before acting on something. So if we see through this routine, it also engages with the emotional aspect in learning. Yeah, it's not just something. It's not just intellectual rigor, but it is also it helps to engage with emotions as well. So, as mentioned, I think I mentioned briefly, I teach a group of pre-service teachers. They're going to be English language teachers soon. So what do they think of visible thinking routine? So I've used it with them in class before, and they do lots of teaching simulations. So one of my requirements for them was to, in their teaching simulations, they were supposed to incorporate the use of a visible thinking routine. So this is what one student said: visible thinking routines help me have a strong framework of activities that will have the students to think, which ensures the effectiveness of the activity. And the best thing is that visible thinking routines can be modified, adapted, and to fit any context. So this is what one of my students, their response to it, what they thought of visible thinking routines after using it in their teaching simulations. Visible thinking routine is an interesting tool, and I would always use when I do my micro teaching. Since the day I was introduced to it as a teacher, I was like, oh, that's nice to hear. Visible thinking routines help to construct and mold students' thinking in order to achieve the objective of the lesson. It helps to tap on students' schemata and broaden their thoughts on their topic. Visible thinking routines are also very flexible. All right. And finally, this is what another student had to say after having the experience of using visible thinking routines in their teaching simulation. So it provides a clear, structured, comprehensive framework for students to think and reason. I like both teaching and learning with visible thinking, as we can translate our thoughts methodically. There were instances where I thought that further simplifying the procedures in visible thinking can make thinking quicker and easier. Nevertheless, visible thinking is the groundwork in showing students how they can approach a topic or a problem clearly. So I think, for these students, pre-service teachers, novice teachers, visible thinking routines were helpful because it provided them with a framework, all right, on how to develop their activities. It's very structured, very organized, and as they said, it's very flexible. You can adapt it to all sorts of different lessons, right? So if you're a teacher, and you want to engage more deeply in thinking with your students, and you're looking for a way how to do this, I think this is a great starting point that you could consider. I want to also, I know time is, I also want to briefly share a story from one of my students, Amalina, and I hoped that she could have been here today to share this, but unfortunately she's not able to be here, but I will share this on her behalf. She's currently a teacher. She teaches in College Yayasan Saat Melaka. And I met Amalina when she was one of my MEd students in UPM. So I teach a course on thinking skills in ESL. So it's a whole course on thinking skills, and she was a student in this course. One of my assignments for them was to come up with an e-portfolio. And when I saw her e-portfolio, Amalina shared how she incorporated visible thinking routines in her English language classroom. So I was very excited because to see how she had actually embedded something that we had talked about in class in her own teaching practice. So let me share with you what she did. So she used two routines in her class. She's used Step Inside and Tug of War. So she found Step Inside to enable students to express their thoughts and concerns about issues, and it helped her class be engaging. For Tug of War, she used it to prepare students for an in-class debate. All right, so students were able to take a stance on an issue and back up claims with sound reasoning. So she did it in groups, and students could see the strength of each argument. And these are some pictures that she shared with me of her students engaging in these thinking routines that she used with them. So that's just a little bit about what Amalina did with her students in her English language classroom that I thought I should share with you as well. So it is doable, all right, and we can easily incorporate it into our classrooms at different levels. I did it at a university level classroom, and as you can see from Amalina's story, she was able to do it with her secondary school students as well. And that's great because it's really flexible. These routines are really flexible that you can adapt to different contexts. Okay. I wonder if we have time to try. So I've talked a lot about visible thinking routines, but do we think? Sorry, maybe I should ask. Could I have a bit more time? Could we try out a visible thinking routine? Okay, all right. So let's try a visible thinking routine together. Now, this visible thinking routine is called I used to think, now I think. And I hope all of you can participate in it and try out this visible thinking routine together. So this is my task for you. At the start of this webinar, you may have had some initial ideas about thinking skills and what it was all about. Now, in just a few sentences, I want you to write what it is you used to think about developing thinking skills through your English lessons. Take a minute to think back and then write down this response. I used to think, in relation to developing thinking skills. Now I want you to think about how your ideas about developing thinking skills have changed as a result of what you've heard about visible thinking routines. So in a few sentences, write down, now I think. All right, so these are the prompts for you. I used to think, now I think. All right, so if you could take some time to respond, we can go back to the Mentimeter link, and let me wait. Okay. Okay, if you could. Okay, I hope you can see my Mentimeter slide. I used to think, now I think. Maybe just a few minutes, if you could share your thoughts. or if it's easy for you to type in on YouTube or wherever you're listening from, that's fine as well. Or if any of you want to type your responses on Mentimeter, that's fine as well. Perhaps while you are thinking of your responses, I will share with you the purpose of, I think you're still able to type in your responses here, but I will share with you a little bit more about this routine. The purpose and application of this routine, yeah. So it helps students to reflect on their thinking about a topic or issue and explore how and why that thinking has changed. All right. Okay. Someone, I'll go back to the task slide. I used to think, now I think. So these are the prompts for you. So see if you can okay. All right, so just to continue, the purpose and application of this routine, it helps students to reflect on their thinking about a topic and explore how thinking has changed. It's useful in consolidating new learning as students identify new understandings and opinions and beliefs. So you can consider using this routine whenever you think students' initial thoughts, opinions, or beliefs are likely to have changed. So for instance, after you have presented them with new information, perhaps after watching a film or listening to a speaker, experiencing something new, having a class discussion at the end of a unit. So these are ways in which that you can incorporate I used to think, now I think. I used to think, now I think as sort of like feedback for at the end of the semester with my students for subjects that I've taught them. So I used to think, what about a course? Now I think. All right, responses coming on. Let me perhaps I can read out some of them. Right. I now think it is easily implemented. I used to think that visible thinking is time consuming and quite impossible to gauge responses from students in class. Now I think with the suggestion you gave, try to only ask 2 to 3 questions only, which gives me hope to retry this approach with my students again in my class. All right, thank you. I see another response. It looks interesting, and surely learners will get excitement in engaging using visible thinking. All right, let me check. All right, we have some on Mentimeter. I'll just read it out. Perhaps I won't. It's good as an alternative approach and helpful in teaching and learning. All right. All right, I have another comment. I used to think that thinking skills is just asking questions to make students think for an answer or an outcome. Old school. Now I think this thinking activity of mine has to expand beyond just asking questions, but doing a myriad of individual and group activities that engage students to think further. Okay, great. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your responses. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to actually try it out because, I've just been going on about visible thinking routines. So just wanted to give you a chance to try it out to see what it might feel like as participants. All right, we have Sharon. I used to think that it was difficult to implement, but now I think the students will enjoy this and help in gaining new knowledge. Thank you. Now, if you'd like to find out a little bit more about visible thinking, you can these are some books that have been written about visible thinking and making thinking visible. This is the latest book, 2020, The Power of Making Thinking Visible. So I think this one was written in 2011 or 2013, and this is the latest one in 2020. So I would like to bring you back again to my interest in visible thinking and thinking, which I shared with you at the start. And I hope, but at the end of this webinar, you have in some ways also developed some interest at least in thinking routines, and might be interested in wanting to try it out in your classrooms. So very quickly, let me just tell you about something I'm currently doing. So I'm, as you saw through the examples, I use visible thinking in my teaching, and I kind of advocate it for my students to use. And I'm also doing a research project on visible thinking, and I'm interested to see what pre-service teachers and in-service teachers, what their perspectives are. So this project, I'm doing this with another colleague of mine from the Faculty of Educational Studies, Associate Professor Dr. Abu Bakar Razali, and we have Nur Faika, who is helping us with collecting data for this project. And we're really interested to hear a little bit more about what teachers in Malaysian secondary school have to say about this and what their experiences are. So it would be great if you could share some experiences with us. So perhaps we can have a Q&A session briefly, and there is a short survey, just to get a sense of what you might think about developing thinking skills and visible thinking skills in the context that you are in. So perhaps later on, after the Q&A session, the organizers could share the link for the Google form, and I would really love to hear what you have to say. In sharing your thoughts with us, we have a lucky draw. So there would be 60 lucky participants who would get a 10 ringgit Grab voucher if you get chosen based on the response that you give us. So I hope that you would share your views with us. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Joanna. Thanks for sharing your insightful presentation. Now, I believe all teachers, especially English teachers, should consider using the suggested routines to make the thinking visible, in teaching. Now, this can foster deep learning, as Dr. Joanna said, and also cultivate engaged students, change the role of teachers and students, improve learning, and also develop thinking dispositions. All right, now we are having our Q&A session. So everybody, perhaps you can post your questions in the comments. And due to the time limitation, so we only allowed one question to be asked at this moment. And actually, based on the first question being asked, which I think this question is the most relevant to everybody, is could you share or upload the slides? Okay. Now, I believe that this question is the most important to everybody. And okay, what I can answer this question on behalf of Dr. Joanna is the slides in PDF are accessible via the link shown in the chat box now. Okay, so you can see there's a Google Drive link being posted in the chat box, so you can access Dr. Joanna's presentation materials in PDF form through that link. All right. Okay. Now, another thing I would like to highlight is because I think there are quite a number of queries. Okay, so because of the time, so I would like everybody to email your queries directly to Dr. Joanna's email address, okay, which is going to be shown in the chat box after this. All right, so so you can, if you have any queries regarding this particular topic, perhaps you want to do a research on that, then you are most welcome to directly email to Dr. Joannas. All right. Okay. Okay. So perhaps let me see if, let's say, got any others comments. Okay, yeah, most of them, most of you prefer the slides, right? Okay, yes. Now, so I believe that this is a very interesting topic. So Dr. Joanna also is reading all your feedbacks through the comments over there. And perhaps if you have further queries, please directly email to Dr. Joanna. Okay. All right. Now, because now we still have another 15 minutes. All right. So now I would like to have all participants' attention to click the link in the chat box to answer a short survey. All right. In 10 minutes time. All right. So perhaps you can look in the comment sections. Then you can see there is a link being posted. All right. So please click that link to answer that short survey. Okay, in 10 minutes time. All right, you may start now. All right, thank you very much for filling up the survey forms, and your inputs are very important to our for our improvement. Okay, and also for Dr. Joanna's research. All right, now I would like to invite everyone to fill up the attendance and webinar feedback form by clicking the link in the chat box. You will receive your e-certificate after submitting the forms. All right, so please, this is the most important. All right, so please fill up the attendance and also the webinar feedback forms, and you can see it will be there in the comments chat box. And for this purpose, okay, you will going to receive your e-certificates right after you have submitted, okay, your forms. All right, so please do it, and we will have around 3 minutes for you to complete this. All right, so please do it now. All right, time flies. So now we have come to the end of the webinar. All right, so thanks for joining, and we hope to see you again in our next webinar. All right, see you. Bye-bye.